You know the drill, right? The bells ringing, sitting in those neat little rows, chopping up the day into 45-minute blocks. The whole school setup is so familiar, most of us never even stop to question it. But what if I told you the system we all went through wasn't really designed for learning, at least not in the way we think about it? What if its purpose was something else entirely?
All right, so let's get right to it. The big question we're tackling in this explainer: was the modern school system actually built to make us obedient? I know, it's a pretty heavy thought, but this idea has some surprisingly deep roots in history.
And boom, this quote really hits the nail on the head. It suggests the original blueprint for our schools wasn't a library or a lab, it was more like a military barracks. The goal wasn't about making you a critical thinker, it was about making you a compliant subject. So let's follow this breadcrumb trail back to where it all began.
To really get this, we've got to start with this kind of huge idea about how our society works and how institutions like schools are, well, designed to shape us.
So, there's this French philosopher, Michel Foucault, and he had this really interesting and honestly kind of creepy theory. He said that modern institutions, prisons, factories, and yep, schools, all have this hidden function to create what he called docile bodies. Basically, people who are efficient, predictable, and, well, easy to control. Okay, and this is where it gets really wild, this idea called panopticism. It comes from this prison design where a guard sits in a central tower and can see every single inmate, but the inmates can't see the guard. So they never know if they're being watched, which means they act like they're always being watched. Foucault said this is the perfect metaphor for how modern power works. You start to internalize that feeling of being watched, and you end up policing your own behavior.
And Foucault saw this playing out perfectly in the classroom. He broke it down into 3 means of correct training. First up, you've got hierarchical observation. Simple, right? The teacher's always watching. Second, normalizing judgment. Think about it. Grades, class rankings, rules, they're all constantly comparing you to some normal standard, rewarding you for fitting in and punishing you if you don't. And last, the examination. Foucault said tests aren't really about checking what you know. They're about classifying you, documenting you, turning you into a statistic.
But look, this isn't just some philosopher's abstract idea. This system has a real, dramatic origin story, one born from a massive national defeat. So, picture this. It's 1806. Prussia gets absolutely steamrolled by Napoleon's army. The loss was so devastating, Prussian leaders realized their country was basically broken. Their solution? A total top-down revolution. They remade the military, the government, and most importantly for our story, they created a state-controlled mandatory school system to literally build the next generation from scratch. And man, it worked. Just a couple decades later, pretty much every kid was in one of these state schools.
And they weren't shy about the goal either. This wasn't about personal growth or fostering creativity. This was all about national survival and raw state power. Prussia needed disciplined soldiers and obedient civil servants, and its new schools were going to be the factories that churned them out.
Okay, so that's a 19th century German kingdom. How in the world did that system become the blueprint for schools in the United States?
Well, the answer really comes down to one guy, Horace Mann. He was a huge education reformer in America, and in the 1840s, he took a trip to Prussia. He saw their hyper-organized school system and was just completely blown away. He thought it was absolutely the future of education.
So he brings this idea back to the States, and he and other reformers start arguing that this super-structured model is exactly what a young, kind of chaotic America needed. I mean, the country was dealing with industrialization, cities were exploding, new immigrants were arriving. A standardized, state-run school system seemed like the perfect way to create some social order and mold everyone into good, productive citizens.
Okay, so the story seems pretty straightforward, right? Schools were built for control. But this is where the whole thing gets a crazy, unexpected twist. What if this whole system, designed to make people obedient, accidentally created one of the biggest engines for economic growth ever? Believe it or not, that's what some new economic research is pointing to, that this Prussian model had a massive and probably unintentional positive effect on the Industrial Revolution. To get this, you gotta look at Prussia compared to the world's industrial powerhouse back then, which was Great Britain. Britain was the innovator. They invented all the cool new stuff, often through self-taught inventors just tinkering in their workshops. Prussia, on the other hand, was playing catch-up. And for that, you don't need a bunch of brilliant inventors. What you really need is a workforce that can learn how to use and adapt all the complex new tech coming out of Britain.
And get this, when economists actually crunched the numbers from hundreds of Prussian counties, the results were stunning. Turns out, basic education had almost no impact on the old industries like textiles. But in the new, high-tech industries, think metals, chemicals, engineering, having an educated workforce was a huge advantage. It just poured fuel on the fire of industrial growth.
And we're not talking about a small change here. A simulation showed that without its highly educated population, Prussia's manufacturing workforce in 1882 would have been almost 4 percentage points smaller. Back in the 19th century, a difference like that literally changes the destiny of a country.
So here's how it worked. The Prussian system, by teaching everyone basic reading and math, gave the average worker the tools to read a manual, look at a diagram, and follow complicated instructions. It basically created a whole population that was ready to soak up and run with the tech revolution that was happening next door.
So what does this all mean for us? Well, it means we've got these two totally conflicting ideas baked right into the DNA of our schools.
On one hand, you can't get away from where it came from, a system built for control. It was, in a lot of ways, designed to produce Foucault's docile bodies, obedient people who'd fit nicely into the social and industrial machine.
But then, on the other hand, that exact same system accidentally created what economists today call human capital. It gave an entire country the basic skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, discipline, that it needed to become an economic powerhouse.
And that's the big paradox we're still dealing with. It's right there, in the DNA of our school system. The standardized tests, the bells, the focus on rules, that's the legacy of control, clear as day. But that same structure also laid the groundwork for a skilled workforce that powered over a century of incredible growth. It's both, a system for conformity and a system for empowerment.
Which brings us to one last really important question. In a 21st century world that screams for creativity, for critical thinking, for innovation, not obedience, which part of this legacy are we supposed to carry forward? Are we still running our schools on that old 19th century operating system of control, or are we actually trying to redesign them to build the kind of human capital we need for the future?